first reading this morning is Exodus chapter 17, verses 1 to 7. The whole Israelite community left the desert of Sin, moving from one place to another at the command of the Lord. They camped at Rephidim, but there was no water there to drink. They complained to Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses answered, "Why are you complaining? Why are you putting the Lord to the test?" But the people were very thirsty and continued to complain to Moses. They said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt? To kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" Moses prayed earnestly to the Lord and said, "What can I do with these people? They are almost ready to stone me." The Lord said to Moses, "Take some of the leaders of Israel with you and go on ahead of the people. Take along the stick with which you struck the Nile. I will stand before you on a rock at Mount Sinai. Strike the rock, and water will come out of it for the people to drink." Moses did so in the presence of the leaders of Israel. The place was named Massah and Meribah, because the Israelites complained and put the Lord to the test when they asked, "Is the Lord with us or not?" Our next reading is from John, chapter 4, verses 5 to 29. In Samaria, he came to a town named Sychar, which was not far from the field that Jacob had given to his son Joseph. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus, tired out by the trip, sat down by the well. It was about noon. A Samaritan woman came to draw some water, and Jesus said to her, "Give me a drink of water." His disciples had gone into town to buy food. The woman answered, "You are a Jew, and I am a Samaritan. So how can you ask me for a drink?" Jews will not use the same cups and bowls that Samaritans use. Jesus answered, "If you only knew what God gives and who it is that is asking you for a drink, you would ask him, and he would give you the life-giving water." "Sir," the woman said, "you don't have a bucket, and the well is deep. Where would you get that life-giving water? It was our ancestor Jacob who gave us this well. He and his sons and his flock all drank from it. You don't claim to be greater than Jacob, do you?" Jesus answered, "Whoever drinks this water will get thirsty again. But whoever drinks the water that I will give him will never be thirsty again. The water that I will give him will become in him a spring, which will provide him with life-giving water and give him eternal life." "Sir," the woman said, "give me that water. Then I will never be thirsty again, nor will I have to come here to draw water." And Jesus told her, "Go and call your husband and come back." "I don't have a husband," she answered. Jesus replied, "You are right when you say you don't have a husband. You have been married to 5 men, and the man you live with now is not really your husband. You have told me the truth." "I see you are a prophet, sir," the woman said. "My Samaritan ancestors worshiped God on this mountain, but you Jews say that Jerusalem is the place where we should worship God." And Jesus said to her, "Believe me, woman, the time will come when people will not worship the Father either on this mountain or in Jerusalem. You Samaritans do not really know whom you worship, but we Jews know whom we worship, because it is from the Jews that salvation comes. But the time is coming, and is already here, when by the power of God's Spirit, people will worship the Father as he really is, offering him the true worship that he wants. God is spirit, and only by the power of his Spirit can people worship him as he really is. The women said to him, I know that the Messiah will come, and when he comes, he will tell us everything. And Jesus answered, I am he, I who am talking with you. At that moment, Jesus' disciples returned, and they were greatly surprised to find him talking with a woman. But none of them said to her, What do you want? Or asked him, Why are you talking with her? And then the woman left her water jar, went back to the town, and said to the people there, Come and see the man who told me everything I have ever done. Could he be the Messiah?
So both our congregations here in Ponoka and in Bashaw do a really important thing in the community. Both have people that go to long-term care and senior facilities to do church services on a regular basis. It's something we share with other churches in the communities. And it's a really important thing to do, because it's not just an activity for people who live in those places. It's church for them. Quite literally, it's church. They're going to church. And so we take church to them. And I think it's such a really important thing, because it means that they're still, not only are they still part of the wider community, they're part of us too, right? We're sharing us with them. That's one of the reasons why I like to make sure that I'm always using, when I'm doing it, I like to make sure I'm always using the scripture passage that we're going to use on Sunday morning, because that way they're even more connected. Yes, yeah, I know they don't probably realize that, but that's okay. The universe knows it, right? We're being a well is the thing, okay? So we both do that. And when I go to Bashaw Meadows, I don't know if you heard this. You might have heard this. I play the piano a little bit. And so when I go to Bashaw Meadows, I like to start with a hymn sing. And I say, does anybody have any favorite hymns? Every single time, there's a lady there who goes, Rock of Ages. Every single time. I'll be honest, I have never liked Rock of Ages, ever. Never really liked the words, don't even start me on which tune, because I didn't like either of them. But that's neither here nor there. Every single time she'll ask, and so we sing Rock of Ages, every single time. So this week, this past week, a week ago, I had a Nicodemus moment. Remember the story of Nicodemus? He comes to see Jesus. He comes at night in the dark, and he doesn't understand. And I think one of the things I said was that I like to imagine, it doesn't say this, but I like to imagine that Nicodemus stayed talking to Jesus until the morning, and then he understood, right? He comes in the dark, and he's enlightened. He leaves in the... Okay, I like it. Anyway, the point is, he's not a stupid man. He's an intelligent man. He's educated, and he's smart, but he just doesn't get it. Somehow, he's still in the dark. And I felt like that with Rock of Ages a week or so ago when I was at the long-term care at the hospital here. And I didn't really know anybody. It's my first time. And so I thought, well, I'll just play a few hymns ahead of time just to, you know. And I turned the page, and there was Rock of Ages. And I thought, okay, fine. And I started playing it. And, of course, I read the words again for the first time, if you know what I mean. And I realized Rock of Ages connects the Exodus story of the water from the rock and Jesus. I know, you're all thinking, you didn't get that. What's wrong with you? But it does. The very first verse, it connects the water from the rock, that right? Moses strikes it with the staff, the same staff, by the way, that he used to make the plague where he turns the Nile to blood. The same staff which, in the first story of them needing water in the wilderness, he sticks it in a stream and it purifies the water. It's the power of God is what it is, right? So the water is the gift of God in the Exodus story. It connects that with the story of the Roman soldier sticking the spear in the side of Jesus, and out comes water and blood. right? And then it goes on to say, hide me in you, right? And let me be part of you. Yeah, you all knew that, didn't you? Yeah. Well, I was excited to have discovered that, which reveals a very important thing, by the way. Hymns are not just tunes, and they are not just words. They are the two things together. And if you don't do the two things together, you will not get the point of the hymn. Right? Okay. So, I had this very illuminating moment. And then I was at Bashaw Meadows this past week, and I said, does anyone have a favorite hymn? And she said, Rock of Ages. And I said, no. We're going to sing it during the service because it's important. And it is that idea that connects the water from the rock, the gift of God, with the water of Jesus being the water that Jesus gives is the gift of God. Why? Because it's a very simple metaphor. I think and that's why it's such a good metaphor. It's a very simple one. The water which nourishes our physical bodies, the water that feeds our spirits. The water that feeds our spirits is love. That's what Jesus teaches us. It's not me, Jesus, is water. It's the love that I bring is water for your spirit. Why? Because I bring the love of God. Oh, and by the way, it's in you already. And that's the point of me, Jesus, teaching you how to share that love. It's a pretty straightforward metaphor, isn't it? And yet, the story actually, and I will confess, I cut the story short this morning. According to the lectionary, we're supposed to be reading verses 4 to 52. It's a long story, that story of Jesus meeting the woman at the well. It goes on and on and on. He meets the woman at the well. She goes off to tell everyone. The disciples arrive. He chats with the disciples. The woman comes back with people from her city to meet Jesus. It goes on for quite some time. The thing is, there's lots in this story that can make it even more meaningful to you. There is. The fact that he meets a Samaritan woman, for instance, because as I'm sure you know, in the first century, not only did Jews not have anything to do with Samaritans because, as I keep saying, Samaritans are Jews. That's why Jews hated them. They're actually Jews who believe something slightly different. They think, as the woman says, they think that God lives on the mountain, and Jews think God lives in Jerusalem. That's just one of the things. There's other things about whether or not they're actually still legitimately Jews, because a lot of them had children with Assyrians, and so they're not really, there's other reasons. But a key point is the one that the woman mentions. So, first of all, Jesus should not be talking to a Samaritan. Secondly, as you know, he should not be talking to a woman. In the first century, men did not just arbitrarily walk up to and start a conversation with a woman because, well, they're women. Sorry, but that's how it was. I know that's really difficult for us in the 21st century to get our heads around, but that's how it was. Okay, so he should not be talking to this person, period. But here's an interesting question. Who else was he going to talk to? There was no one else there. It's not like he chose her. She was there. She was the only other person there. Why? Well, because it was noon, the hottest part of the day, and no one would go to the well at noon, because it's the hottest part of the day, except someone that nobody else wanted anything to do with. Someone who had no friends, somebody who maybe, say, had 5 husbands and was living with somebody who was not currently her husband. You can interpret that however you like, by the way, and traditionally we've interpreted that as meaning there must be something wrong with her. But why? Could be that her first husband died. Could be that she had 5 husbands who died. They could have all been soldiers. They might have been killed. Who knows? Because, of course, in that tradition, if your husband dies, the brothers are obligated, if he has brothers, the brothers are obligated to take you in as their wife. So there's other reasons. It doesn't necessarily mean anything about her other than her life has been incredibly unfortunate. Well, that sounds familiar suddenly, doesn't it? Who does Jesus reach out to? Of course. So Jesus comes to the well. He meets this person, and something different happens than when he had a conversation with Nicodemus. Remember the conversation with Nicodemus? Nicodemus asks a question. Jesus tries to explain it. Nicodemus is like, I don't get it. Jesus tries to explain it more. Nicodemus is like, I still don't get it. In this conversation, he has a conversation with a person who converses with him. This is an intelligent woman who knows her stuff. And they have a conversation. The conversation leads to the woman understanding what Jesus means by, I am like living water. So here's how it goes. Jesus comes up. He's been walking for a long time, so he's going to be thirsty. He needs water. He, of course, comes to a well without a bucket because he's been traveling. He has no way to get the water. There's a Samaritan woman there who helps him. She gives him water. They strike up a conversation. Jesus reveals, not only am I living water, this is the first time in the Gospel of John, and by the way, this is a thing in the Gospel of John. This is the first time that Jesus uses the words, I am. Now that sounds familiar. It should, because that's also, by the way that God describes God to Moses. Who shall I say has sent me, says Moses, and God says, I am. That is my name. I am. So here's the first time Jesus says, I am, and he'll go on to say things like, I am the light of the world, and I am the bread of the world, all of these things. But the very first time he says the words, I am, is to someone he's not supposed to be talking to. And yet, more important than the fact that it's someone he's not supposed to be talking to, he's talking with them. They're having a conversation. There's a back and forth. A relationship has been established. In this encounter, a relationship has been established in which this woman comes to understand who Jesus is. And then she goes off to tell other people. And those people need to see Jesus suddenly. It's like, wow, that's incredibly awesome. Let's go see Jesus. So they do. And there's a whole conversation in the story, this whole sidebar conversation with the disciples about all of this. But they come back, they see Jesus, and of course, they believe. And I think the story actually ends in the end. It says something like Jesus hangs around for a few extra days because he's met people who want to see him and want to talk to him. That is, by the way, I think the way in which Jesus most significantly impacts the world in all of the stories about Jesus in the Bible. It's the part nobody ever says anything about because it's not there, right? We read all the miracle stories, but how often does it say stuff like, how often does it take 42 verses to say, Jesus sat around and talked with people? He listened to what they had to say, and he had conversations with them. It doesn't say that very often, but I think that's the most important thing that Jesus did. He had conversation. That's how people came to understand. The water of life is love. The well is that moment of encounter, that relationship. I think it's really important to understand that. Jesus isn't the well by Jesus' self, the well. The well is the encounter, the relationship. That's where we get the water. That's the $64,000 question, isn't it? I have come to Jesus, give me water, Jesus. And I'm sure Jesus is just like, okay, well, conversation, let's talk about it. Nope, give me the water. I don't know how you do it, but make some magic happen. Wow, we've heard that story before, haven't we? How many people come to Jesus, including Nicodemus, and say, you can do cool stuff, so obviously you're from God. And Jesus says, that's not the point. The cool stuff. The point is love. The point is engaging the Spirit. How do you do that? Well, you can't unless you engage Jesus. I'm sure Jesus would say to people things like, come to me with doubt and questions. Tell me stuff about you. Talk to me. So that little bit in the story about the 5 husbands and the guy you're living with now, I don't hear Jesus saying that with judgment. I hear Jesus saying that with compassion. Literally, how crappy has your life been that it's been like this? I am so sorry. But I can help you. I can help you understand love and life. Talk to me. Have a relationship with me, and it will work. It will happen. You will feel it. You will know. Remember what I said earlier about clearly the only place for that to happen is churches? Because sometimes it doesn't, right? It's how you might even I didn't know it wouldn't happen here, but you might go away from church feeling even more thirsty than when you came in the door. Why? Probably not because of the words, probably not because of the person or persons proclaiming Jesus to you, but because there was no relationship. There was no moment of connection. There was no sense of belonging. That's what's established in this moment between this woman that isn't even supposed to be talking to a man, let alone someone who's not a Samaritan, and Jesus, who's not supposed to be talking to a woman, let alone a woman who's a Samaritan. Did I get that in the right order? Okay. But they do. And there's a moment of engagement. And that moment of engagement is the well from which that water flows. And then what does she do with that? She sits there and she goes, wow, that's awesome. I feel so much better. No, she gets up and she goes and tells other people. And no, it doesn't say she goes and tells other people and they go, oh, you're full of it. No way. They go, that's awesome. It's exciting. Let's go and see. It's the moment of engagement that is the well from which that water flows. We are the well, all of us. Our faith community is, our larger community is. Each of us is part of the well. Because each of us is capable of creating that moment of engagement. Just like the Samaritan woman. Just like the Samaritan woman with Jesus. Just like the Samaritan woman with her friends and her community. Just like Jesus then with that community. I'm going to hope that the disciples were involved in that too, rather than they were sitting off at the side by themselves going, what's he doing talking to those damn Samaritans? He's not supposed to be doing that. We don't talk to them. They're not part of it. Does that sound familiar too? Because there's lots of churches that do that as well. They're not one of us. There's lots of communities. There's entire countries that do that. They're not one of us. Yes, you are. We are all us. And we're all capable of being the well that creates community and shares love. The love of Jesus, the love that God is.